Twilight hadn't realized that she was already nearly at a full gallop towards Fluttershy's house until her injured shoulder began to ache. She slowed down her pace, knowing for a certain that she was out of the dragon's reach. For now, well, she fought for a moment or two of consideration. I think it's given at this point that nothing really has a certain. She swirled her ears around, checking for any noise behind herself as she walked. Well, I don't hear its roar anymore. I think I should be okay, at least for now. The fog seemed to only grow thicker as she approached the edge of Ponyville. She was heading towards the bridge that crossed the stream on their way to her friend's new home. But the mist was so impermanent that she couldn't see it until she had literally almost fell into it. She almost took a sharp inhale and backed a few steps away from the edge of the chasm. But where is the bridge? She wondered, glancing at the path beneath her hooves. It should be right on the trail. Oh, my dear Twilight! A voice sounded to her left. She snapped her attention to the cloaked pony that had just somehow snuck up behind her without her realizing it. What a surprise! She exclaimed joyfully. What do you want? Twilight growled, her eyes blaring with a mixture of suspicion and hostility. The mysterious mare seemed hurt. Nothing but to say the fact is that you're alive is very pleasing to my eyes. This world has claimed so many a soul. I am grateful to see that you're still in control. Twilight realized that what she had just said, and she hung her head slightly, letting her nerves settle. I'm sorry for snapping at you. This place has me on edge. I'm not supposed to trust any pony anymore. Not while I'm in here, at least. She nodded. Trust is a danger you will do well to erase. The truth only in harm's disastering place. Do take care, though. Do not dismiss the outright. Lies won't help you in your final fight. Twilight threw up in her head in exasperation. Kill things. Don't kill things. Stay in one place and get killed. Explore and get killed. Listen to the truth. Hide from the truth. This is all so-so, she tried, but she couldn't seem to find the words for her frustration. I believe your word you're looking for is aggravating, the mayor suggested. Twilight then nodded sadly, not to mention completely, utterly horrifying. Fear is the more emotion is irritating and is designed to keep us from trouble, but in some situations it causes danger to double. Here it is a poor, far way of keeping danger at bay. Monsters will find you regardless of what little you feel and what you little suppress, the mayor stated ominously. Yes, everything here is based on fear. Well, I guess, Twilight then said with a shrug. Are you actually going to tell me anything? Or are you just going to follow me around? At this point, I'd probably be fine with either, she added to herself miserably. The mayor laughed. I see you want help as your journey worsens. I'm sorry to say there is no way for me to share your burden, though I do wish to see this through alive. I'm afraid there's no assistance I can contrive. Twilight rolled her eyes in despite the fact that she had to expect this sort of answer. Whatever then. See you later. She was about to walk off when the mayor spoke again. I have one thing left to say. One last thing that is true. Nothing is real if it doesn't hurt you. Twilight then turned her face but she had vanished into the fog. She listened for hoofsteps, wondering why she would have to run away so quickly. But there was no sound that met her ears. It was silent as the graveyard, and Twilight felt utterly lonesome once again. Twilight continued on their way, this time seeing that the broken bridge had once impeded in her progress was now patched up haphazardly, with the large recently uprooted trees linking the two edges of the river and making it possible to cross. Assuming that her talk with the mayor that may or may not have been a mirage, but it had something to do with it, she carefully crossed the slippery wood and continued on her way. The trek to Fluttershy's cottage was after that. Thankfully, it didn't much last longer. However, when she reached the small cottage, there were two friends stayed. She found it at the same of despair as the rest of the Ponyville. Part of the roof had caved in, windows were still boarded, and there was a large paddock with a chain in front of the one and only door. Twilight covered her nose as she inhaled with a waft of decay. I am definitely not looking forward to whatever's in there. The more she thought about it, the thought more about it, she noticed that the horrible conditions and terrifying aberrations were becoming almost commonplace. It was as though it was unsettled to her, so she put it to a side. Not even bothering to try the door, she researched the perimeter of the house and found her three statues off to the side, behind the pile of rubble that used to be the roof. They were all made of dull gray stone, and there was a wooden podium in the middle of three. Twilight examined each statue in turn. The first depicted unicorn mare with hairs sent clean through her eyes, piercing through the back of her head. She looked as if she was screaming in surprise and agony, as the attack was sudden, unexpected, almost as if she felt betrayed. The base of the statue labeled Truth. The second statue was one of a Pegasus, though it was more of a burst. She only showed the torso and its forelegs with its hind legs, presumably pedestal that supported it. This one had a pole that pierced right through the ear and protruded from the other. This one seemed as if it were executed, and its face was limp, expressionless. It was the rest of the body hanging from the pole that had been stabbed with. The base of the statue labeled Lies. The first statue was that of an earth pony stallion, though this one was lying face down, hunched over at the sword that stabbed right through the mouth and up through its skull. His now limp hooves seemed to be they at once clutched the sword, leading into the assumption that the stallion's death was on his own hooves and his own responsibility. The base of the statue was labeled Secrets. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, Twilight muttered, addressing each of the statues in turn, sparing them with only a grimace. She carefully approached the podium on its single poem, written in the piece of the ancient parchment. Brighted are the ones that stay, lighted are the paths that away. I can't tell you what to say, no one's to keep you in this fray. Doom is quickly on its way, eager to come out and play. Death's favorite color is gray. Twilight studied it for a moment, trying to pull some sort of meaning. Well, I guess I shouldn't have really expected it to make it all much sense on its own, she thought. She bent over, looking at every side of the podium. Before tapping it lightly, there was an echo. That means it's hollow, she realized. After gently taking the piece of paper and placing it into her magic, she turned and slammed her hind hooves into the wooden stand, mimicking that her friend Applejack had once taught her. The podium splintered, revealing a very heavy sledgehammer that was hidden inside. She examined the sledgehammer, contemplating whether or not she could wield something hefty or even carry it with her. Every little thing you keep puts more strain on your magic, she internally recited, remembering the spell's instructions. Eventually she then decided to place it in her spell book, knowing that it would likely prove more useful in the future. She immediately noticed the weight, though, through the hammer and placed it upon her, almost as if she had gained 20 pounds. In an instant, Earth, she mumbled, shaking her head. Guess I'm reaching my limit. I hope I find a lighter weapon soon. Otherwise, this is just lunging this thing around could strain me completely. After she had steadied herself, she took the poem out of her magic and set it to the ground and studying it. After a few moments, though, thought of the dragon's distant roar reverberated across the foggy landscape. The deathly noise made her jump nearly 10 meters into the air. Deep breaths, Twilight, she told herself, trying to calm her nerves. She considered trying the sledgehammer on the door, but she decided against it, at least for the time being. If I do solve this puzzle, I don't want anything coming after me. She studied the parchment again. Okay, so if that's the last word puzzle had to do with the words, then this probably does too. She studied the podium for a bit before she realized each of the capitalized letters, when she put together, spelled blinded. Just a simple acrostic, she thought. She glanced over back towards the statues. I guess it's pretty obvious that I have to do next. She went over to the statue of the mares who were having their eyes gouged out and removed the sledgehammer from her magic before gently tapping the blunt metal of the head of the multi-purpose tool on the stone. A crack formed that quickly spread down between the eyes of the mare, and in a few moments the statue had silently crumbled into dust. Twilight sifted through the rubble, searching through anything irrelevant before finding a note. The door is unlocked. She blinked in disbelief before galloping over to Fluttershy's door. It was still unchanged, as she suspected, with the giant padlock on the center of the hanging solemn gatekeeper. Just a test, she thought. She nudged through the door with her hoof, threw one faintly. The rusty chain crumbled, with the padlock falling and shattering onto the ground. Twilight nearly lost it. "Oh, come on!" She clapped her hoof over her mouth, not before her aggravated outburst echoed not once, not twice, but 3 times, all across silent Ponyville. The dragon roared again, though this time Twilight knew it couldn't have been more than a kilometer away. She nearly saw its silhouette reflected in the fog. Bursting into a full-fledged panic, Twilight grabbed the hammer and shoved it into the portable hole, ran across the cottage, and shut the door silently as she possibly could behind her. Her heart was pounding in her chest, although she was still shaking as she slowly sank to the ground, pressing herself onto the wall against the door. She didn't even dare to move. The dragon's footsteps sent shockwaves through the ground, causing the floor to tremble nearly as much as Twilight was. She heard it hiss and the smell of air for her, slowly pacing around the house, as if it were every place it had lost her scent. Twilight stilled herself in frozen place, not wanting to give it any more opportunities to find her than it already did. She was hoping against hope that it wouldn't destroy the cottage looking for her. Eventually, through the defiance of all rhyme and reason, she had heard the slow flap of its heavy wings as it sailed away to it. It must have been as if the cottage didn't exist. That was the only explanation she could think of. Dragons she knew from Rays and Spike had excellent senses. There was no reason for her to have gotten so lucky. She had more than once. "No pony escapes dragons," she breathed. "At least I'm not the only one getting tricked by this place." Standing up, she felt a burst of rage as she remembered completely pointless puzzle, knowing that this place only was toying with her now, messing with her head. But she thought for a few moments, I guess it wasn't all for nothing. I did get a hammer. She pondered of what the mayor had said to her earlier. Nothing is real if it doesn't hurt you. Did that mean that the dragon had only an illusion, since it hadn't injured her? She then realized that she didn't actually see a dragon at any point in the past few hours. She had only heard one and seen the shape of it through the fog, though roughly resembling that of the dragon. But she hadn't seen any of the crisp detail near the beginning of her journey. Swallowing, she decided that it was best not to test that theory. She had thankfully gathered her nerves, and she began to examine her surroundings, using the pendant around her that provided a faint, flickering light. Fluttershy's cottage was a wreck, but it was to be expected. Broken, moldy furniture littered the floor, the wallpaper was peeling, and the stench that fell of mildew permeated the smell of home. Twilight didn't even want to push her luck by calling her out for her 2 friends. If this place had anything like the rest of Ponyville, then they would have both vanished. No use of alluring the dragon by yelling for them. If they're here, I'll find them soon enough anyway. That in mind, she began to explore the kitchen. It was filled with various tubes and scientific equipment, all of which were completely corrupted and contaminated with all sorts of gunk that looked as if it had once been food. The counters were filled with vitals and jars of stuff. Tubes were made their way through the air, connecting various different protruded vessels. Twilight's stomach did a flip at the smell, compelling her to quickly duck under the tubes and remove herself from the horrible lab. The living room was much more bearable, showing only the ordinary signs of decrepity. As she poked through the furniture, though, Twilight noticed an odd cylindrical hole on the ground, just wide enough that a single pony's hoof could fit through it. She carefully peered down into it. At the very bottom of the small pocket appeared to be a button with a steady drip of water coming from the rim from the tiny pit. Twilight was about to reach in and press it, but she hesitated at the moment. Instead, just to be safe, she dragged a limb onto the broken chairs and poked it down to the hole, aiming for the button. As she suspected it, the stick hit the flesh instead of the device, and she watched the sight of it intrigued as the chair leg slowly disappeared down into the small crevice she had once heard of something gorging itself onto the wood. She glanced back down into it again, saw a small, many-toothed, worm-like animal just finishing its meal before crawling back up to the base of its lair. The slow drip started again, though this time Twilight knew it was saliva and not water. I guess I would just have to kill it, Twilight told herself, sighing. She ambled back to the kitchen and held her breath as she looked for anything possibly toxic. Eventually, something did jump out to her. A beaker filled with substance that looked far ordinary to her to be in the twisted laboratory. She levitated a covered beaker of a clear liquid out of the kitchen and set it off to a three-legged coffee table, removing the cap. She took a small whiff on it what it contained. A sense of burning flared up in her nostrils, and for a moment, but she did manage to recognize the incredibly strong chlorine smell that was hydrochloric acid, likely in concentration. She cautiously glanced back at the hotel of the living room. This wasn't what I want to do, she reminded her to herself. I just don't have any options. Exercising extreme patience in the presence of such strong acids, Twilight levitated the beaker into the hole and slowly lowered it until she felt the worm's mouth wrapped around the edges. There was a crunch of glass and the hissing of flesh, and finally silence as the small monster was liquefied. I'm sorry, little guy, Twilight found herself saying, and she gently felt it. Something in the air had motivated her to press that button. She had to get to it no matter what. Her life could be on the line. To her, it seemed like it always was. After she was sure it was dead, she retrieved another limb from the broken armchair and levitated down to the small hole when she heard a small clicking as she pressed the button. For a few moments, nothing happened. Then Twilight heard the creaking of the floorboards, splintering of the wood. The house then began to shake in ever-increasing violence, and Twilight had struggled to stay on her hooves. Broken picture frames fell from the walls, shattered two tables and turned onto their sides, and cabinets then crashed to the ground. As quickly as it started, though, through the tremors vanished. Twilight then paused as the silence was absolute, that she was unsure of whatever or not she was still alive. A tremble-rending siren snapped to her senses. It was a loud, low wail that seemed to have emanated just above Fluttershy's cottage. It was the same one as she heard before, and it was not by any stretch of imagination a good sign. Twilight embraced herself, but nothing happened. She paused and looked around. Despite the increased amount of rubble lying on the full ground of the house, nothing seemed to have changed. She took a cautious step towards the kitchen. One plank snapped under her weight, and she fell into an infinite abyss. She woke up at what looked like in the strange world that she had been to multiple times before. The other world where she had fought of the broken alicorn, whipping liquid from her eyes. She examined her surroundings and tried to hold her breath. In the room she was in, it looked like there was a newborn's, as if though everything else in this hellish dimension, it was crooked and disgusting. What remained of the shattered crib was a lying smolder pile on the ground. The smoke softly rose to the top of the blackened bedchamber. As in Twilight glanced up to the gray trail, she saw various dolls hanging from the ceiling, and some made of rags, others made of polyurethane, but they all shared the deafening characteristic. They were hanging by their necks. Twilight whiffed in the metallic tang of the blood once more. She glanced her hoof to see in the horror it was stained red. She blinked as if more her own blood gushed into her forehead and down her eyes, and she gasped in horror as she saw her own horn lying in front of her, snapped off out of its base. She must have landed on it when she fell. She instinctively tried to pick it up using telekinesis, but a splitting pain carved through her skull, as if it was being split open by a cleaver. Her broken horn didn't even move an inch. She felt herself tearing up, not from the pain. This was it. It was over. Without her magic, she couldn't defend herself. She couldn't even have a weapon that was trapped inside of her portable hole. She realized in a panic that perhaps the hole collapsed, leaving its contents to dissolve whatever the netherworld it was created, but was reassured that she felt the burden pressing down on her. She inhaled sharply again as she remembered that, since she couldn't open anymore, everything inside of her was now only dead weight. Twilight then shook her head violently, spraying a few drops of clotting blood left and right. No, now's not the time to panic, she told herself. Absolutely note that the wound did not hurt on its own, and only pained her for when she tried to use her magic. Does this mean that it's not real? And if it does hurt, there are other ways to disable magic. And I don't know if this world is real or not. Even again, I don't even know what this mare says is true or not. She sighed in exasperation. I'm not dead yet, she reminded to herself softly, staring at her horn. I'll need to keep going. It can't get any worse at least. She mumbled glumly. She knew resigning herself to death could be pointless. The only option was forward. She then glanced back up at the hanging dolls, searching for anything in the clue that has a nature of its other world. An eerie wail that seemed to emanate from the ceiling, and that a full being begging for help. But other than nothing, Twilight's ears perked, and she only turned around, but no pony was there. There was only a long, dimly lit corridor ahead. Twilight felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Something was watching her, and she knew it. As soon as she thought about it, though, she realized the irony. Since it wasn't there being watched in this awful, Celestia-forsaken place, she wasn't in a location as much as she was inside of an entity of its own right. After one more quick mental sweep of the room, she picked up her horn between her teeth and limpered down the obnoxious corridor. The corridor walls were made of thick glass, and the lighting was so poor that Twilight could barely see her own hooves. Her journey, though, down the hallway was a short one, and it ended with a thick glass wall, the same as the rest of the thin chamber. Assuming she missed something, she turned around and tried to head back to the room with the hung dolls, but discovered that it was barred down by a wall of glass as well. Twilight set her own horn down in the corner of the room, where she was unlikely to forget about it. "Okay, so you want to show me something?" she said, praying that she didn't have to do combat in such close quarters. "What is it?" As if on cue, Twilight had heard spots switched from behind her. She provided to see what looked like the inside of Fluttershy's living room again. This time, though, Fluttershy was inside. She looked confused and frustrated, though through the source of the eerie, it didn't seem to have come from the tarnished state of her house, rather as if she was looking for something important, or if she was trying to remember something just out of reach, something right at the tip of her tongue. I wonder if she knows about the dragon, Twilight thought absently. Just then Rainbow Dash entered through the door, her expression dull, lifeless. Fluttershy just turned and gasped, rushing over towards her lover and gripping her tightly. "I don't know how we got here," Fluttershy whispered. Twilight was momentarily shocked by how clear she could hear it. It was as if they were side by side. "How did we get in here, Dash? How are we here again?" "I don't know," Dash said, as her voice was flat, her tone hushed. "But it's gonna be okay." She didn't sound like she meant it. Twilight then considered banging on the window, trying to get their attention, but she knew it was pointless. Fluttershy's cottage didn't have a large gaping piece of glass that would split in half, and that was being shown to her was pre-recorded. Either it had already happened, or it was going to happen. "How do you know it's going to be okay?" Fluttershy asked, pressing her head against her mare friend's chest. Dash then pulled out of her grip, shaking her head. "Somehow, just somehow," she said, her voice flat. "Are you okay?" Fluttershy asked, her expression brimming with worry. "I don't know that either," Dash said, her voice shaking. "When that thing attacked us, I just froze. I couldn't do anything to help you. You almost died, Fluttershy. It would have ripped you apart." "Yeah, but it didn't. I'm still here," Fluttershy said, stepping in front of Dash's view. "You can't blame yourself for every little thing, Dash. I could take care of myself." Dash then pulled away again, as if she couldn't bear to be in Fluttershy's gaze. "I could have done more. I could have done more to help you." "You did all you could," Fluttershy soothed. "Dash, don't you trust me?" Dash paused, her gaze distant, staring off into space. Fluttershy slowly moving closer to her, as if to kiss her on the cheek, but Dash took a step away before she could. "Shy," she began slowly. "I want to know if you love me. I want to know that you know that I'd do anything to keep you safe." Fluttershy then looked up at her. "Of course. Then I want you to close your eyes," Dash stated. "Why?" Fluttershy asked. Dash stepped closer to Fluttershy, leaning in and planting a quick kiss on her partner's lips. The kiss, though, like Dash's expression, was dull and lifeless. "Because I love you, Shy." Dash whispered to her ear. And I need to prove that to you. Fluttershy looked skeptical. Dash, I know you... She interrupted her. Shh. She hushed, staring into her partner's eyes. Please. Though slightly uneasy, Fluttershy did as she was told, obediently closing her eyes. Dash took at least a few good steps away from her, her eyes glistening when she saw the suspicious pose of the metal of debris around the living room. She picked it up in her jaw, and it was a knife, a rusty curved blade about 8 inches in length. Dash? Fluttershy asked, upon hearing the grating of the sound of the metal on metal. Dash, what are you doing? I won't let the monsters get to you, Shy, Dash vowed, speaking of through the knife with a surprising charity. I won't let them tear you to shreds. You deserve better than that. Fluttershy noticed Dash's expression change in tone, but despite the fear, she steadied herself and kept her eyes shut again. Dash, you're scaring me, she whimpered. I'm so sorry, Fluttershy, Dash said. Before Fluttershy could whip around to defend herself, Dash struck the knife between her shoulder blades, driving the blade deep up and cutting her throat. Fluttershy made an awful choking noise before falling to the ground, whiffering for a moment, raising her hooves to her neck, fleeable to do any effort to dig the blade out, before eventually falling still. Crimson blood gushed through the wound, frantic pulses that gradually slowed and stopped as Fluttershy's blood pooled around the hardware floor. Dash then stared at her mare friend's body for what seemed like hours. Then she screamed, a heartbroken wail that was so powerful that caused the thick glass Twilight was standing behind to vibrate. And when she was finished, she collapsed right next to Fluttershy's body, sobbing into her pelt and hugging her, as if she was still alive, as if she was in disbelief of after what she had just done, as if she would do anything to take it back. The spotlight shut off. Twilight then collapsed onto the floor, not realizing that it had been crying until the sobs started to rack her body. She had curled up into a tight ball, knowing this scene before had likely hadn't happened yet, scared and petrified all by the same. That didn't happen. I'm only wasting water, she thought, clinging onto anything that might help her break out of her to purr. I don't know when I'm going to be able to drink again. It was only an illusion. It didn't happen. This isn't any reason to give up. If you don't even know if Fluttershy or Rainbow Dash even step hoof in this world, you're letting this place get to you. If you get it inside your head, then it's all over. You have to snap out of it. Dash wouldn't do that to Fluttershy. She just wouldn't. Nothing helped. It doesn't matter how much she tried to comfort herself, how much she tried to grasp the truth, to hold it in close to her and wrap it around her in a warm blanket. She wanted facts, cold and stable. She wanted a reason to rely on, explanation sturdy and steadfast. Nothing was enough, though. Information couldn't overdride the emotion. She just witnessed a murder. And so she cried. She cried until she started to shake, trembling up with a pent-up foreign emotion that she had just tried to keep under the wraps. She was terrified, not just from the other world that presented her with such horrors, not just by the fact that she was more powerless and fragile than ever before, but it was because she knew she might not be able to fulfill the promise to Spike after all, to stay safe, to stay strong, and to come back okay. And he would never forgive her, or not for keeping that promise. She shook the idea and latched onto it, gripping it tightly as if she was afraid to strangle it, and then she held onto it, letting it pull up off the stone ground, waiting patiently as it wiped the tears from her chin and cheeks, letting it steadily on her hooves and clear her eyes, and as she took the idea and tucked it away, safe and sound, somewhere she would never let it go. All she was doing this was for him, her little number one assistant, and nothing would stop her from keeping him safe. And the world beckoned her onward, and at the far end of the corridor, there was a booming noise as spotlights turned on once again, and Twilight, curious more than ever, trotted up the window and watched. The scene looked like to be in a divided bedroom. One side had an enormous pink and red color scheme, with butterflies and wildlife painted all over the walls. The other side had a more blue and green color scheme, with pictures of the ocean and sky. Toys and clothes were scattered everywhere, and of the 2 cribs in the room, inside both Fluttershy and Rainbow Dash stood, having a conversation. I don't know, Dash, Fluttershy mumbled, staring at her hoofs. I don't know if I'm ready to do this with you. Well, what's wrong? Dash asked, concerned as if though likely that something was bothering her significant other. It seems too good to be true, Fluttershy said. I just know something bad will happen. I just don't think I deserve it, Dash. It's all too wonderful. I think we should wait. For what, till we're older? How old? Do you want to wait a year or 2 or 5? When will that ever be? Dash demanded. She saw the look in Fluttershy's ears and eyes as she bombarded her with the fierce questions and a sigh. Look, Shy, I'm not going to force this on you, but it's all here. And just last week you were saying this was all you ever wanted, and you're saying you don't deserve it after all you've been through? That's exactly it, though, Fluttershy interrupted, startling Twilight. Fluttershy was never the one to argue, but she seemed upset, conflicted. I'm afraid that I'll do the exact same thing. You would never, Dash said sincerely. She tucked a hoof underneath Fluttershy's chin and gently nudging it upward so they would do that to look each other in the eye. I know you, Fluttershy. Don't you trust me? I do, Fluttershy said, shying away from her mare friend's hoof. I just don't trust myself. You're so amazing at everything you do, and I'm just not. Dash stepped up to Fluttershy, pulling her into a tight hug. Are you worried that you're going to mess up and I'm going to hate you forever? She nodded miserably, and Twilight could see the self-loving reflect of the tears forming in her eyes. I always am. You know, sometimes I worry about that too, Dash said nonchalantly, stepping away from Fluttershy and turning back towards the blue side of the room. Fluttershy's ears perked up as she turned around as well, clearly surprised. You do? Totally, Dash affirmed, gazing at Fruity, though through the clouds painted on the ceiling. I've told you before about how back when I was little, I only cared about how fast I could fly, and the stunts I could pull, and just how awesome I thought I was. You've always been awesome, Fluttershy said. Dash giggled. Sounds weird when you say it. Shy, yeah, I was pretty cool. But the thing is I only cared about you being cool, and if you weren't as cool as I was, then you'd make a better way for number 1. I thought I was cool. I thought I had friends. But no matter how many ponies looked up to me, I never really had any pony who could really understand. And as when I met you, and you told me how you felt, I never thought it would work. Honestly, it did. And it's awesome, isn't it? Fluttershy nodded. More than I could ever hope for. I've told you that before, haven't I? Yeah, just last night twice, Dash added. So yeah, but the thing I'm most afraid of you is that thinking that I'm too good for you. And I'm not. I'm afraid that you're going to leave me for some stupid reason like that. And when I tried to get you back, I hurt you even more, Fluttershy. Of every pony in the entire world, even our closest friends, I think you're the only one I could really trust. Fluttershy, almost overwhelmed, she glanced at Dash, then her hooves, and hesitantly at Dash again. You really mean that? Dash nodded, taking Fluttershy's hoof into hers, gripping it tightly. She seemed as if she was liking to struggling to contain herself. Fluttershy, I need you to make a promise, she said, her voice choked. Anything, Fluttershy said. Promise me that you'll love me, Dash said, and I promise I'll love you. Fluttershy didn't hesitate. I do. Dash grinned despite herself exhaling sharply and wiping away her tears. She had been worried about the whole answer. Then I do, too, she cried, pulling Fluttershy into a crushing, loving embrace. The spotlights then shut off.